गुड इवनिंग विद्या। चलने अच्छा छे। यह बहाना कुछ कंस्ट्रक्टिव, कुछ इंटरेक्टिव बात हो सके छे। सोशल मीडिया पर तो गाली गलौज के अलावा और कुछ हो नहीं छे। हम अंग्रेजी में तनी एकरा रखो कि टेक्निकल डिस्कशन में वो चीज ज़्यादा कंफर्टेबली एक्सप्लेन हो सके छे। माफी हो करा लो। While going through your snippet, I would say for 25 minutes, there are a lot of things that I found not acceptable to my thought process. I am in touch with China for last 10 years. Since I was in touch with them, or I am in touch with them, so I have studied their history in slightly deeper way, starting from Glimpses of History, a very basic book on Chinese history, to a lot of other books, in order to understand their psyche, why they behave the way they behave. I also have a luxury of interacting with their business class for last 10 years, and some of the employees first hand interaction, so not a great in-depth analysis or in-depth understanding from that point of view. Sorry, someone came, so I had to pause my recording. So I found a lot of conflict in what you have presented, both theoretically as well as practically. So without much ado, I would come straight to the point. The first contradiction which I saw in your presentation, that China is suffering or will suffer great deal because of its political ideology or a totalitarian ideology that it follows. In my understanding, or the way I see, I don't find China suffering single bit because of its totalitarian ideology. Every country is willing to deal with it. Every country is willing to go extra mile in order to gain some privilege, some favor. And that's the nature of international relation. I would like you to point out on what front. Economic, you have said there is nothing to stop or to make China suffer. Politically, what any country is doing or will do to fight or to make confrontation with China. Travel, visa, or anything else. Simply two words of caution or reminder loaded with international tone that you should correct your totalitarian nature, or you should be slightly more open. That's the two word that they are told. They also listen and they move on. They don't even bother what you are saying. So while you say economically they are a superpower, but politically they are weak. Economically, politically, travel, any other relation you take, they are not penalized 1% other than verbal caution at best. Again, you have praised China for it being a manufacturing hub. Yeah, no doubt about it. It is. But understand the cycle of manufacturing. Manufacturing hub used to be England. If I start with industrial revolution, the entire colonization, the entire thing was primarily for manufacturing purposes. Britain needed raw material, unhindered raw material, and it also needed market for its manufactured goods. The entire political gamut that was played out was slightly less political and more economical. They withdrew also because of that only. When they withdrew, they were the victor of World War II. India was not in a position to fight with Britain and take freedom. Mostly none of the countries were in that position. Militarily or politically, they were still superpower, though bleeding superpower, no doubt about it. But it was economic which went for toss. So manufacturing started from Britain. I'm talking industrial point of view. Prior to that, it was with China, India, and it has been historically with many countries. So if I see the current economic scenario, so industrial revolution becomes the base of judging that. And so England was, or London was the hub of manufacturing. Moved to Europe, then to US. So I will come to the current one where till here everybody sees this manufacturing movement. Most academicians, primarily the political ones, tend to miss out the one which I am going to tell you now. Till 70s, from 40s to 70s, Hong Kong was the manufacturing hub for the world. Since international trade was very minimal, so whatever transaction that was happening on international trade, Hong Kong was able to supply and satisfy it. Yeah, Hong Kong was a upnivage of Britain, but it acted independently, at least in the international transactions or international economic transaction. After 70s, it moved to Taiwan. 70s to 80s, it remained in Taiwan. From 80s, it moved to Korea, South Korea. That is 80s to 90s. And from 90s, China came into picture. So, international manufacturing hub, yeah, the scale changed, the grandness changed, and many other factors came into. But understand why this manufacturing hub is not a permanent thing. I have tried to take you from industrial revolution point period. But even if you see the last 5 decades or 7 decades, it is not constant. China knows that. More than anyone else, China knows that. For being a manufacturing hub, you need to have two things. First, cheap labor, educated, trained, but cheap labor. That's the first requisite of being a manufacturing hub. Second is a mix of things. So, raw material or availability of raw material, technological know-how or transfer of technological know-how, infrastructure, and things like that. The problem with the second part is it is transferable. Technological know-how, infrastructure, policies that can be amended, that can be made available with within certain time frame at many countries. If you look at these transitions, because if you have to describe future, you have to look past. There's no way to look into future. The only way is through past. Hong Kong came out of contention because it didn't had technically qualified manpower to manufacture at the level which started after 60s or 70s. So capitalist or the investor or the people had to look out at a place where they can manufacture those things at a so manpower requirement forced it to move to Taiwan. Obviously US supported it, there were other political considerations, but Taiwan was a ready place where things were easy to move from Hong Kong, and they were open economy, open to US, and other things made it more easier for it to capture. From there, it moved to South Korea. Manpower and other considerations played a role. Again, the same thing started happening with China. As I have messaged you once, that capitalism or money goes where it gets best return. Currently, it is getting from China, so it stays there. But slowly, it will realize, or it is now realizing that it is not getting best return due to various factors, and so it has started moving. So, production is a very tricky thing. It doesn't stay. It's a very that kind of lady which keeps running away, not being your permanent or being in your permanent hold. However, it is pertinent to note that in this entire period, Japan played an important role. It remained a manufacturing hub without being too much noticed or grabbing too much of international attention. So, whether it was car or robotic technology currently, so Japan has been one manufacturing hub which has been ahead of its time, or at least ahead of international manufacturing scenarios, and it has kept itself away from what description I have given you right now. One thing again you will notice, you are predicting that after Corona gets over, things will change drastically. Being a student and a teacher of international relations, one thing which you can see very easily is nothing happens drastic in international relations. Things happen, definitely changes, things definitely change, but doesn't change drastically. Even war happens after a period of time. And once war is over, even then the changes are slightly slow, but obviously that's once you are a victor, you can do changes much faster. So even after Corona is over, there are a lot of factors. No nation is ready to manufacture. No one nation can manufacture for all. No nation can manufacture every item at a economy or at a cost or at a quality single-handedly. So the only option is to close the borders. Zero transaction or near to zero transaction, limited transactions. See, we feel government derives or government makes these changes. Yeah, they do. But if you see the current or if you see the phenomena, technological changes, people's aspiration, there are so many soft factors which are very, very powerful but very soft. India is politically not strong, in international world that way, neither economically that strong, but it is a very big soft power. When we say democracy, it's a soft power. Same way, for nations, it is not easy to ask its people to sacrifice for a prolonged period of time. So once technology changes, now with broadband, internet, and things, transfer of information became much easier. So what nations were able to hide from its population easily, they were not, or they are not able to do it now. Now, even if you see, if I can tell lightly, Mr. Modi was able to do some light show and some clapping show. After that, he also had to go back to the reality, how to face Corona. So, symbolism or makeup thing will not work now as things have changed. So, this thinking is an utopian thinking or academic thinking that world will shrink, world will, after Corona, world will get consumed in its own fear and will all nothing of that sort is going to happen. It's a video recording, so after 3 months you can send it back to me saying, see all this, so many changes happen. Some changes will happen, gradual changes will happen. Drastic, I don't find, or at least I don't predict. Coming back to your analysis of League of Nations and UN. Again, you have missed the most basic point. League of Nations failed. One of the reasons was it failed in its political duty of keeping international peace. And it was a political organization. Same way, UN is a political organization and it has not failed in its political duty. Yes, it has remained mum. China has been able to force it to remain mum. It doesn't allow meeting on Corona to happen. But that's not a political debate. It's more medical and then political. And obviously medical, economic and then political, I would put it that way. So the UN has been taking a backseat from long. This episode will further put it to more backseat. Any any organization is as strong as its member allow it to be. US played UN for a long, now China is playing it. So all strong nations or at least big five will not allow UN to be a totally transparent, fair weather international organization. And this is the limitation which UN had from beginning, has it today and will continue to have it in future. National interest will always dominate international interest. Next point what you have raised is there is duality or ambiguity in China's foreign policy. None. Absolutely none. China's foreign policy is driven by the same agenda, same policies, same principle by which any other nation proclaims or follows its foreign policy, that is its national interest. China foreign policy is as good or as bad as India's foreign policy or US foreign policy. So there is no duality in that. If you look at it in duality way, you have given empty examples of India being economically friendly to China and politically opposite of China. So this duality is with all nations. US is having the same problem. Hardly few country can claim it to be that their foreign policy is single, straight, direct oriented. It has to deal with nations. It has to deal with limitations. So it will look at its interest and it will look at it that way. China also doesn't bother or doesn't disturb international people. See, they are very clear. Inside my territory, how I am behaving, it's my call. You don't teach me or you don't pinpoint me. If I am not wrong, as ASEAN and other countries, along with China, developed a second code or other code for human right, that what will be considered as human right violation. So it was a European concept, I would say, till 85 or 90s. And then these countries came and said, okay, human rights will have these factors too. And then it became. So China is very, very clear what I am doing inside my border. I am a matured nation, I am an old nation, I am a strong nation. I love my people more than you do. And there is a balance which has to happen between freedom, freedom of expression, political freedom, economic freedom, livelihood, betterment of everyone, and so many things. So, while we are growing, there are certain compromises that we have to make for that growth, and in order to meet West, we have to look down or avoid looking at certain things for a certain period of time. It's not a permanent thing, for a certain period of time. And it normally doesn't interfere in anybody else's headache. Like India's internal policy, it doesn't bother too much, it doesn't interfere, it doesn't do like US does. It doesn't, it simply allows it wherever its economic interest is there, for taking some port or for some taking some contract or so there it will interfere politically how each nation behaves, barring nations nearby Taiwan and other small island nations nearby. It doesn't bother much how countries behave. So it doesn't prefer to be interfered, and it mostly avoids political interference in other nations' affairs. I would conclude with the thing that this notion of friendship is a rarity in international relation. At least natural friendship is very few. US and UK are natural friend. There are a few more countries which are natural friend, all-weather friend, like Saudi Arabia and Pakistan are natural friends. Basics match, but there are only few limited. One can count on fingertips those examples. So China also plays the same international role which India plays, which US plays, and which any other country plays. I think I have crossed your time, so I need to close it now. I hope I have not been too much bombarding and one sided. But thank you for starting it. Bye.